Welcome to the Mission Driven Leader, presented by TaleoConnects.com, where we explore the new, unknown, and innovative themes for work and give people the ability to show up resilient every day. Here are your hosts, former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA, Ed Hoffman, and partner and Vice President of Portfolio Management at Taleo, Laurel Sim.
Well, welcome back to the Mission Driven Leader, Ed. And I can't tell you how sad I've been that I've missed you for an entire month.
I know it's been a long period of time.
It sure has.
But I saw the countdown. I saw we do this. We have actually a professional countdown, and it made me think I was recently near NASA at the Kennedy Space Center.
Every time I try in my daily life to figure out how I can make you feel like you're back at NASA, that's because I'm basically a scientist, rockets, of brains, of everything. So hopefully I'm helping you with that.
Well, NASA people really love farmers.
Okay, then I'm nailing it.
We always talk about the farming angle. One of the greatest leaders I ever knew is an individual named Noel Hinners. And he led the Goddard Space Flight Center. He led the Air and Space Museum. He led strategy for NASA. He was a brilliant scientist who could work with engineers and project people. And when I was speaking to him once, I said, "What do you look for in terms of talent?" He said, "I like farmers," which was one of the where do you go with that? And
anywhere.
Yeah, he said, farmers are people that when they have problems on their own, they have to figure out how to solve them. So he liked people who could solve problems without, a lot of drama. So there you go.
So I appreciate that. I'm gonna stand on my little soapbox for a second about a farmer. You have to be an engineer, you have to be a welder, you have to be a construction worker, you have to be a mechanic, you have to be a veterinarian. So your toolkit is really quite ridiculous at times of how you need to show up, because you can't just ask everybody to come in and help you resolve everything because of the costs, the time, and the urgency in often situations. So I take a lot of pride in the farming background, as we always know. But I also take a lot of courage in how I show up and what I do, because they fail quickly and sometimes miserably. But man, do they go to resolve fast at the same time. So yeah, there we go. There's our farmer talk for the day. We could take it off the list, because you know how I like to bring it up.
I know, yeah, no. The only thing I would say is I could never be a farmer. And one of the things I'm known for is I say people. It's all about people, your network. It's because I'm not capable of doing most anything by myself. Growing up in a city, you buy from people, you have people paint for you. It's part of helping the community. You get others to do things. And so that's the whole angle of.
Well, you do that at farming too, but it's like, can you help me fix this fence?
Yeah. Well, okay.
Ed, I'm really excited about our guest today, and I know that she's a good colleague of yours. I'm hopeful that in advance of us introducing her, that you talk a little bit about your book and the view of telling a great story and creating a great experience from that story, and how that relates to your book. If you could just spend a moment with me on that.
Twist my arm to talk about the book. Actually, I had a fun week, because this is a week I started talking to the publicist. Up to now, it's all been about the editing, the writing, all that stuff, and now it's about how do you communicate it? How do you get a public knowing about what this is all about? How do you create the story for why people would want it? And it's the SMART mission, NASA's lessons for managing knowledge, people, and projects, and it ended up in a different place. It really ended up, what are the principles that individuals as leaders, that teams or projects and that organizations and societies can use to be successful. And it kind of referred to what I saw at NASA, is that NASA never had me doing one thing. Sometimes we did courses, sometimes we did storytelling, that's how I met Jessica, sometimes we used technologies. Basically, whenever there was a problem, when there was an issue, when it required a journey, the notion was go figure out how to do this. And really, one of the key things that we hit on in the Smart Mission book is the importance of story. And I've always said, I think I've said it to you a number of times, I think the thing that had the biggest impact on changing NASA over the years was the use of story. Once you got leaders who would come and talk to people about we need to go from here to there, once you had practitioners of projects starting to talk in terms of how we learn from stories, once you see people making a connection over the oceans across different countries, we have a common vision for what we're trying to do. It's basically like Lord of the Rings. You get people who had never worked together, who don't initially like each other, coming together for this journey because that story, the narrative is so so powerful. So that is the connection to the Smart Mission. To have a Smart Mission, you have to have a powerful story, and that's the connection to my friend Jessica Fox, who I think we should introduce because she's the expert in storytelling, and I'm just I make this stuff up as we talk.
I will continue to stay silent, which we all know is not easy, and have you introduce Jessica for us because I'm just so darn excited to have her join.
So Jessica Fox, we've known for a long time. I won't even go into the number of years. I think first and foremost, Jessica is a storyteller. I think that's where your heart is. That's where your tendencies go. You're also an author, having written books and screenwriting. You're also in the movie business, and I love movies right up there. If I could have done anything, it would have been in the movie kind of industry. You're a producer, a director, and one of the things I think that you do that's cool is I think they talk about the indie kind of movie, which I equate as you do what you want to do. It's around creative. It's around really kind of coming together, trying to create a project. It's not kind of studio bound. And you've worked in Scotland, where you live, for XpoNorth, where they have an annual film and entertainment and arts festival. You helped pull that together. And you wrote the book, The 3 Things You Need to Know About Rockets, which I think is kind of cool. Maybe you can tell us what those 3 things are. And I've known Jessica for a long time. So, Jessica, welcome to the Mission Driven Leader podcast.
And Laurel, thank you so much for having me. And Ed, that was an awesome introduction. I really appreciate it. Nothing much. It brought to mind, I think this is a good place to begin. It brought to mind when I first came to your office. And I remember sitting there and you had the most amazing collection of books. First of all, I was so impressed because we were at NASA headquarters and I looked up at your bookshelf and I thought, what an awesome, eclectic group of books. It wasn't just about engineering. It wasn't just about project leadership. You had a series of Maria Tatar books, and Maria Tatar, for those who don't know, is she was head of, I think, children's literature at Harvard University, and her specialty is fairy tales. I was so excited by that, and so we began a chat about story and fairy tales and why they're important. And a quote of hers keeps on coming back to me when you first talk about story. And one of her many amazing quotes is, although children know a story is not real, it doesn't make it not true. And I think, we have to be careful a little bit in this kind of post-truth era when we talk about truth, but there is something really important about story. And, Ed, you talked about the idea of a story being almost like Lord of the Rings, where it has the ability to congregate people around one identity. And that is also true. It's also incredibly important for what some people call an ego-syntonic existence. An ego-syntonic is where it kind of insides match your outside. It's able to have a reflection of your internal universe on the external world and vice versa. So being able to communicate to people about your own internal universe stories are incredibly important. They're, some of the oldest knowledge transfer systems in the world. So values about our community that are important to us, information about what to eat, what not to eat, what are taboo, what's beyond the visible horizon, things like that too. They become very, very practical, but in a kind of a more big vision way. I think stories are our main source of communicating meaning amongst people. So not only why we're doing this, but what's so important about the collective. And also, Joseph Campbell said, you might not agree with me. Joseph Campbell says stories, what people are searching is not a meaning to existence, but the experience of being alive. And to him, that's what stories did. They give us the experience of being alive, a reflection of that.
I think it goes beyond that. I think that to me, story is a respectful indicator that we listen to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, right? You have to take time to hear the stories, and it's funny. I hadn't thought. I didn't know where you were going with when you came into my office the first time. I have a mess, a gaggle of books, and you're right. I love fairy tales, and I love Maria Tatar.
Yeah.
I always get her volumes where she analyzes and describes these stories.
Beautiful.
But I think it's about, like you say, it's about the meaning. It's about a sense of where we're going. But I think it's ultimately respectful.
Yeah.
When you're talking to people, when they're willing to listen to you, and vice versa. I think it's the core of a relationship. What do you think of that, Laurel?
I agree.
Going to pull Laurel in.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this conversation, mostly because I think the best way for people to comprehend and understand the other side or the situation in its entirety is through story. We can try as much as we want to throw in data and percentages and create solid foundations to make decisions. But if you can't allow for that connection point to get everybody on the same page, it's almost impossible for a decision to get made. And I fundamentally believe that that's how a story creates that wholesome completion to make the decision. I don't know, is that kind of where you were leading on the collective point, Jessica?
Yeah, definitely, Laura. I totally agree with you. I was thinking about your situation with calling over someone to fix a fence on the farm. And if I didn't know how to fix a fence and someone were to give me kind of a bullet point of information about exactly what I have to do in order to fix it, that wise phrase that an actor only listens to the first 3 instructions you give them comes to mind. I think I would be overloaded with information and I couldn't remember it. But if you were to tell me a story about fixing a fence, the story could go on for an hour and I'd probably remember the whole thing. So stories are very important. Emily Dickinson says, tell me the truth, but in a slant, which I quite like.
Yeah. It's also interesting, and I think you saw this because you worked at NASA for a number of years, really bringing stories. You were part of that early stage of bringing it. I always felt, I don't know if you agree with this, that NASA ultimately is a storytelling place. And my recognition is that project people or people who work in organizations tend to be storytellers.
Yeah.
As much as people who fish or people who farm, we tell stories because we're trying to connect with things. I saw NASA always do that to explain to people why we're doing this, why we're stopping this. I mean, is that what you saw when those early years at NASA?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I think one great lesson that I saw at NASA is one of our master forums where people got together and told stories. And people were pretty good and very willing to kind of disclose and learn. And we were sitting around these tables. And afterwards, we went into the bar at the hotel and people really began to tell stories then. And so in a way,
I would be excellent in that area, Jessica, by the way. I'd be excellent.
But then, the idea of how do you artificially create that sense of like the campfire that people come around? Stories require relaxation. Just like creativity actually requires some kind of relaxation of your boundaries, your mind, the sense of vulnerability that you put out there. So sometimes when we formalize it too much, things become too rigid.
Wow, that's a big thought that's making me already consume with what the rest of my week is going to look like. Honestly, about I'm always cognizant of creating space for curiosity and creating space to be vulnerable and open and honest. I don't know that I've ever thought of it in the context of when you're trying to create that connection point through story or through examples. Am I also allowing for that space? Wow, that's a big nut. I'm making a note.
Absolutely. Do you know one of the most powerful writing exercises that you can do really is first and foremost not picking up a paper or pencil or listening to music, but allowing time and space for your mind to wander. And I don't know how often we do this now, given the fact that our phones are so immediate and someone's either always trying to call us, or we have our days so scheduled that we're actually, when our minds wander, we're thinking of the to-do list that's coming up or processing something that's happened before. But stories fundamentally, especially if you're trying to create something out of nothing, is about association when you look at the creative process. So this reminds me of this, reminds me of this, reminds me of this. And eventually your mind starts churning something solid out, or working on a problem, or a solution might come from left field. And it is about giving yourself that unstructured time to allow your mind to wander, to look out the window, to go for a walk and not have something that you have to be thinking about.
If I were to guess, I feel like my mind wanders a lot when my husband's talking to me, but maybe he's the one to answer that. He's the one to answer that. I am quite curious about the world that you're turning into, and the progression of change that you've had to participate, endure. I don't know what the right description would be.
Adapt.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that need to be considered with the way streaming TV is, and how movies are perceived, and how things are watched and observed nowadays. Like, if it's not exciting in the beginning, I'm bored. Like, it's a bad show. Like, there was a lot of stuff in there. But where are you at right now with all of that?
It's really hard. I think what's being talked about, the story out there, is that there's a huge amount of streaming possibilities now, and all these different ways of getting an audience. So therefore, there's a huge demand in content. And the story is that there's never been a better time to be a filmmaker of any kind. That's the story. I find that story actually quite toxic for a whole bunch of reasons. And it's because although it's totally true, the demand for content's much higher, the type of content that there is a demand for is actually pretty risk averse. So what you have now is you have a huge amount of algorithms determining the structure of storytelling and the structure of content, and what's watchable and not watchable. And the data coming back is incredible in terms of when people pause, or when people fast forward something, or when people linger on something. The consumable aspect of film and media and TV also has gotten faster. So the amount of times the amount of people I talk to who've just watched Bridgerton season 2 in like 2 days, and now like they've talked about it, they're done with it, they're ready to move on. I see a hand being raised. I did the same thing.
Watch Bridgerton.
Yeah,
it's a sassy show. You should definitely watch it, Ed.
Yeah, you have all of that to look forward to. There is a bit of an addictive. And when I say addict, I mean addict. They did studies about watching TikTok and hooking up your brain, and it's the same parts of the brain that cocaine light up. I mean, there is a proper addictive quality. And if you look at kind of your dopamine as you're watching Bridgerton, and the idea that you need to consume more and more of it, and then you stop, and then there's this drop in dopamine, you're kind of depressed for the day that you've just stayed up till 4 a.m. watching this whole thing. The way we consume story is so different, and it's actually, it's still communal. I'm still optimistic that it's still communal. There's all, online, the way people chat about story and character, it's beautiful. One of my favorite experiences was being in a restaurant a long time ago. And I was eavesdropping, like I often do, in a conversation that was happening at another table. And they were going on about this marriage, a really dysfunctional marriage between these two people that they seemed to know. And one seemed quite abusive and maybe mob related. And then the other one seemed to, be a slight covert narcissist. And I was really interested in this. And it turned out they were talking about The Sopranos. But they were talking about with such an emotional investment that they were arguing about these people as if they knew them. And that to me is my deep joy. But sorry, going back, Laura, I love when adults believe in fictional universes enough to invest a lot of time and energy into them. I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a sense of play. Again, it's engaging in a sense of meaning. It's a common world that we can all talk about and invest in. But going back, I think we're in a strange time for storytelling. In general, I think good storytellers' job are to kind of soak in the zeitgeist and create stories that we might not think we want, but that we need, that address something in us that we're deeply thirsty for, that we don't know how to offer ourselves. And I don't think that's what's happening in terms of content creation. In the indie world, it is, definitely. But in terms of kind of massive, mega mainstream storytelling, it's not.
Well, it does. I think it probably represents a dramatic change in society. I teach, as you know, of course, Future of Work at Columbia. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that we're going through a period of a massive transition that is different than any other, humans have dealt with, right? And one of the things that we've discussed about is, I believe really if you want to look at the future of work, look to the movie industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have those positives where I think one of the things I'm guessing you've always liked is the freedom, the creativity, the collaboration, the fact that you don't get locked into something. But on the other hand, you have the problems of the freedom. What was that? The Eagles song of, freedom is another word for kind of being on your own. And I kind of messed that up a little bit. I think basically that
the
was...
The sentiment's so true, though.
Yeah, desperado, right? It's and I think also how do you deal with kind of the new place you're in, and so how do you you've been successfully negotiating your career, your life. You were working for NASA at Jet Propulsion Lab, years ago, and shortly after that, you told me you were switching into the movie industry. Yeah. So both California, both in that area. And how did you make that choice from one place, which probably gives you more security, to another place that doesn't, but maybe that takes you more to your own personal dreams? How did you make that decision to go there, and how do you survive in it?
Totally hubris, I think, is what took me there to start with. I thought I was going to write like an award-winning mega script that was going to be totally easy transition from NASA to the filmmaking world, which did not happen. But I think for me, it was the best of both worlds, wanting to continue. First of all, NASA was the best job I ever had. And I told you completely ruined me. I thought, working for NASA was such an eye-opening experience in terms of how other industries are project-oriented. That was so interesting to me, and how many parallels there are, and how many lessons that we can learn from each other between the filmmaking world and any other project industry world. But also the unbridled creativity and imagination and optimism at NASA was something that the film world deeply needs. And it really surprised me that I found more resilience and more openness and more risk-taking at NASA than I did in the film world in Hollywood. And that also taught me something. And it made me very thirsty to use those lessons I learned and put them back into the film industry. And surround myself with people, like-minded people who weren't risk-averse and who were telling the stories I wanted to tell. And it was hard at first. What I first did was start a company and then write a book, because that was easy to do on your own, and then sell that book for an adaptation. And, it took me a long time to do my first feature, which we just completed. And during COVID was also another real challenge, on top of doing a very indie first feature.
Well, first off, congratulations on that. That's fantastic. I think this is a good time for us to maybe take a break, but I would love to come back to that conversation. While we're taking a break, maybe, Jessica, you can think about your best Edism, and we can talk through that. Mine is Rocket Man. It feels a little weird, but it's right for me. So let's go to commercial, and we'll be right back.
We'll get back to the rest of the episode in just a moment, but first, a word from our presenting sponsor, TaleoConnects.com. As a manager, you know how important it is to solve issues right the first time. If you don't, you risk wasting precious time, money, and resources on things that could make the problem even worse. That is why at Taleo, we start by getting to the root cause of your specific problem so that together we can implement the solution that gets you the results you are looking for the first time. Taleo's unique approach to management consulting and resourcing is focused on building a community of experts that work together to help clients solve complex problems and find success in their businesses. We work collaboratively with you to implement the solution that will solve the root cause of your problem, not just the symptoms of that problem. From management consulting and project management to staff augmentation and resource recruitment, Taleo's trusted team can help you take your organization to the next level. If you're interested in learning more about how Taleo can help you overcome your organization's obstacles and take your business to the next level, visit TaleoConnects.com today.
Okay, thank you for the commercial, and back to you, Jessica. I really wanted to talk a little bit more about how COVID was for you because we all have those situations, and Ed and I are continually looking for opportunities to create good stories out of COVID, because there are so many fantastic stories out of it, outside of the challenges that existed for so many people.
But first, you got to tell us about the feature. What's it called? What's it going to be? Where do we find it? What's it about? And then how did you do this during COVID?
So Ed, you're one of my inspirations, I have to say, because you've always been so encouraging. And every time we talk, you're like, so what are you making? What are you making? I felt like I needed to have something good to tell you. So that was one of the reasons for making a feature. Okay. And by the way, I just want to earmark, I want to talk about inviting Jay to NASA at some point, because that was one of the most magical, transformative experiences I had when we were
thinking the same exact thing. I was just, before the break, I was going to say, let's talk about Jay O'Callahan. But to sequence it, tell us about the feature, what it's about, maybe a little bit, as a teaser. And then, as Laurel's saying, how'd you get it done in a time of COVID, or just getting it done? And then we can come back to Jay.
That sounds great. So to quote Jay always says that storytelling is working with energy. Go where the energy is, which is, I think, a lovely way of giving yourself permission to follow your own instinct.
That could be the tagline of this podcast, Laurel. Go with the energy.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
And so COVID really did shape the story that we told. So because of COVID, I knew that we needed to tell a story that was in one location, that people could camp out there and basically stayed there through the making of it. So it had to be local. And down the road, there was, for my stories, I'm always really first inspired by place, whether it's a landscape, a building, a tree. It's like there's a physical rootedness to the story, and then everything builds out from there. And there is this beautiful house in Southwest Scotland called Galloway House. I'm a little loath to talk about it because I don't want loads of people showing up there. It's privately owned, so please don't harass the owner of the house. But it is one of the most beautiful, uncelebrated buildings. And it's right by the sea with these incredible gardens nearby that are open to the public. And it is very remote. So I thought this is an incredible setting for a film if the owner's kind enough to let us film there, because we're basically at the ends of the earth here. No one could touch us with COVID if at least we all bubbled together and we could all stay in this house and have a story that's built around this house. So the owner, Kamal, kindly gave me a tour of the house so I could actually craft a story that used the architecture of the place itself. And the story is a retelling of Cinderella. I never liked the Cinderella tale, if I'm being honest. But there were a couple elements of the Cinderella folk tale version that I loved. And the first one is that Cinderella, in a lot of the folktale versions, she was in danger in the kingdom that she was in and actually had to flee and leave her home behind and completely recreate her identity and start afresh in a new place. And she also was given, in many versions, this magic chest that sunk into the ground and followed her wherever she went. And in it, she put some of her things. And I thought, that is so close to the tale of a refugee, where they have to leave their home for another and they can only take what they can carry. And that started, again, this idea of storytelling as association. That started making me think of my grandparents, who are Holocaust survivors, and they had to leave one home for another and only take what they could carry. And I thought, how interesting to make Cinderella Jewish. I'd never seen that before. So, and not only that, but in Scotland. So, what if this young German Jewish refugee shows up at Galloway House in 1937, right before the war, and she's starving and looking for work, and you don't know what her history or background is. And she gets welcomed in by the family, and she doesn't know that the family are Mosley supporters, and the family doesn't know that she's Jewish, and it kind of starts taking off from there. So that was the beginning of the story.
Wow.
You've got me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's watch it now.
Yes.
It's also, what's fascinating, you couldn't have known this, but with what's going on in Ukraine.
Oh, God, yes.
The timeliness, unfortunately, becomes another issue of, yeah, you're absolutely right. How do people have to sometimes, in a bag, carry their life, meaning, and start over again, and have to deal with the tension of, do I fit in or don't I? These are life issues.
And how much of my previous identity do I feel safe in sharing? How much do I recreate in myself completely?
Yeah. And so how did the COVID, how do you do a movie in the last, what we've gone through in the last 2 years?
It's so hard. I think we even, little decisions to big decisions of how are people going to get food to set? How can we make that COVID safe? How can we make the bathrooms COVID safe? Where are people going to stay? If they're getting transported to set by someone who's not bubbling with us, then therefore that's like a huge security leak. I mean, there was a myriad of things. So shrinking the size of the cast, prioritizing people who are local to work on it, which turned out to be a huge blessing because there's so much talent. And where I live is an incredibly remote part of Scotland. There's 900 people and about 16 bookshops right by the sea where I live, which to me is ideal. But it's not a part of the world where they get a lot of film coming or access to the film industry. So that's something we are really proud of, actually. We had mentorship schemes with young people in the area who did want to learn about film, who could work on this film. But again, people tested themselves every day. They had to isolate before the making of the movie to make sure they were clean before coming to the set. And we only had one scare, which if one person on the set got COVID, we would have had to shut down the entire making of it and we couldn't restart. Our budget was so low that we didn't have enough to postpone or redo it. So it was an extreme sport.
Yeah, it gets into what you're saying about projects in general, about risk.
Oh, gosh.
And I imagine that entertainment, film, are probably at the ultimate end of risk. How can you anticipate these things? And so how do you build your own resilience? I've known you for, as we mentioned, a long time. One of the things that I've always been so amazed by you is your courage. What you're doing, I always felt you loved. There was never a question of that, but it's like, where do you go tomorrow? What do you do next? Yeah. There's always these issues. How do you deal with your own resilience in an industry that's largely about failure, right?
Yeah,
I mean, most films,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good question. And I do think about that a lot because some of the people I admire most, who are really well-known producers, shared with me the ratio of how many projects of theirs on their slate. So in the film industry, you have a slate of projects, almost like, let's bring it back to a farm, almost like a beautifully planted field, or fields where things maybe come into crop at different times so that you're not madly harvesting everything at once. So on your slate, ideally, you'd have things that are in development, also in production, in post-production, at different stages of finishing, so that they're not coming to fruition at the same time. And I think the ratio on average is about 1 out of every 7 projects crosses the finish line.
Wow.
And these are 1 out of every 7 projects that take decades to work out. So I think The Queen's Gambit took 15 years to make.
Wow.
And when people say 15 years, they don't mean it was so intricate in terms of the costumes and the set that they had to collect things over 15 years. What 15 years means is that they were going door to door, that they had attached people that then weren't attached anymore, that they may have lost the rights and bought back the rights. And it takes so long to get to the point where you can make the thing. And it's not, I was going to say it's not rocket science. It's not physics. So it's not like that's a rule that has to exist. Things can happen a lot faster. And I think with Stella, our film, what we wanted to prove is that you could actually write, fund, make, and finish a movie within a year, which is come this June, we would have done that.
Completely agile. So you're part of the wave that we hear about in terms of projects doing things faster.
Doing things faster and doing things one at a time. We don't have 7 projects on our slate. We have one that we cross the finish line on. We'll have another one that we cross the finish line on. So there's not a lot of waste. But I think that idea of so what is resilience? Is it the ability to learn from past mistakes so that failure makes you stronger? I remember that NASA phrase, that failure is not an option. And when I first saw it on a t-shirt in the gift shop, I thought, God, that's a really harsh philosophy. And then after a while, it softens because you realize what it means. And what it means is that actually true failure is almost like a tragedy where a character doesn't change despite the journey that they went on. But if you learn and you grow, it's not a failure. It's a stepping stone to success, really.
Although my understanding is that Gene Kranz, who is the flight director who supposedly had said he never said that.
Really? Is it apocryphal?
That it became something in Apollo 13.
Wow,
that Tom Hanks and Ron Howard, that they put that in there. So I think Gene said, he never said that. And obviously there are many failures, but I think you're right. When you're in something that's so vital, life and death, you don't have that as an option. But again, the power of the movie to create a storyline, a tagline. Yeah.
And in fact, if you want to move quickly through whatever it is, whether it's a project or most of my life is projectized, is to fail quickly and then learn and then take that next step and fail quickly and take that next step. Kind of like what I was talking about in the farmer story. Those farmers are really going to kick my butt soon. I bring them up all the time. But I think that's what that means is failure is not an option. If we fail quickly and we adjust and create resolve, then we're nailing it. But if we fail and we just put up our hands and say, I'm done, that's where resiliency doesn't show up. And that's what really pisses me off.
Absolutely. And resilience
that is by the way, the nicest. So far we've gone through this and there hasn't been any inappropriate language. So
I know. I'm so proud of me today.
Yeah, I know. I thought we were going to go there, but sorry, Jessica. Yeah.
I was just thinking about that idea of resilience. You have that image where someone gets knocked down and you pick yourself up again and dust yourself off, and that ability to do that over and over again. I think resilience in a project industry may look a little different, and I can only share from kind of the more film and book world the places where I really failed. Absolutely failed, where I didn't have resilience, was where I had changed a project so much to fit what I assumed were the needs or the feedback that I was getting that I no longer identified it as the thing that I wanted to do to start with. And this happens all the time. So you might submit a script and you're like, this is great, but they want it set in America instead of the UK. And this is great, but can you turn it into more of a rom-com rather than a dramedy? Or this is great, can you do this? And I think it was Nora Ephron, I could be wrong, says surround yourself with people who try to make your work better, not change it.
Interesting, yeah.
And for me, that sense of real resilience is about fine-tuning your instinct to know, okay, how can I take feedback, which is important, and grow, but not do it so much that I'm changing the thing to start with and I lose persistence.
That's interesting. I was hearing someone last week, I was in an event with project leaders. One of the tips from a successful project leader is find people who are looking to support the dream that you have, not people who are trying to change it. And that's so natural in a project environment because you have requirements, you have a direction, you have goals. But there are people who will, if they understand what you're doing or they believe in you, they will help you try to go in that direction. And there are others who are always trying to change things. in terms of different approach. That sounds like an interesting notion in terms of resilience.
Could I, sorry, I know that you guys were talking a little bit earlier about a gentleman named Joe. Jay.
Jay O'Callahan.
Okay, so can we kind of finish off with that story? I'm quite curious about it. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I was going to just segment into how do you get creativity and creative. So I think Jay O'Callahan and you is a great example of that. So yeah, tell us about Jay.
Yeah, I think in addition to my parents, who one's an engineer, one's an artist, and they both kind of heavily influenced my interests, Jay probably is my greatest inspiration and mentor. And Jay O'Callahan is a storyteller of the classic tradition. So he's an oral storyteller, which means he spends time within communities and creates a story to speak to those communities, like the Steel Mill Workers Union or the Emily Dickinson Institute or NASA. He also creates original stories, which is how I know him first. He created children's stories that I grew up on, which are brilliant and beautiful, and I still listen to them for life lessons. And they speak so well to the human condition, to optimism, to kindness, and they're complicated and beautiful. And he also does adult stories, both memoir types of stories and fiction, and they're phenomenal. And he performs them live also. And when I think it was an anniversary of NASA, wasn't it, Ed?
I think it was the 50th anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had been talking about ways to kind of honor this, and I had spoken about Jay, and Ed, again, in his incredible openness and instinct and trusting the people he's working with. I think we had you come to visit Jay at his home.
We went to Boston for Jay, and also there was the small movie making company that we went to visit. It was when we were starting a whole effort around Walden, learning from story, and how do we do that? And I was fascinated by that. Yeah.
And do you remember there was a manger on the desk that you recognized? I think it was made in Brooklyn somewhere.
Right. That's right. Yeah. In a previous life, I used to work in a handicrafts import-export company, and used to put together mangers. Yeah. So it was.
It's amazing. It is amazing. So we visited Michael Flaherty at Walden Media, who had done incredible things like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Holes, and he did the big adaptations of children's books.
That's right.
And then also to Jay's house, and Ed ended up bringing on Jay to create the first ever oral story for NASA, for a government organization, which is so incredible. And we got him to come to the headquarters. Ed, would you tell that story, Ev?
Yeah, so my connection, to give a little bit of background, is we were coming up to the 50th anniversary. I loved working at NASA, and I loved not only the mission, really the people. And when we were talking to Jay, he was talking about working with a firm that was going out of business. It was very successful for decades. And they brought him on board to tell a story about that creation, that organization, and the people. And I thought, to me, again, that's the ultimate in recognition, where we share stories about each other. And so I said, I'd love you to do a story that captured the lessons of a program environment like NASA, the successes, the failures, the people. It should be about the people. And when he came up to Washington, he asked a great question. He says, what's my mission statement? And he caught me. I didn't expect a creative artist or storyteller to ask that. And what came out of my mouth was, I want you to create a love story to NASA.
It's so beautiful.
Jay joked with me, how do you create a love story for an organization? And I said, I don't know, that's you, but you'll find it when you talk to the people. And the creative ingredient is, we went to many of the centers, probably 5 of the centers, and we spoke to half a dozen at each location, project people, people who were working the mission, and they all had a different story. And he used that as a way of pulling together what ended up being called, you can go online actually and find it, Forged in the Stars. Forged in the Stars. And it He's a master. He's brilliant. I remember, by the way, the sensation of getting ready for this first to be presented at JPL, which is outside of Los Angeles. I felt if there was a place that would understand storytelling, Californians would get it. And we went there, and I felt good up to that moment. And as it started, I was sitting in the front row, and I started heating up, literally just starting to. And I thought, either I'm having a heart attack or I'm having massive anxiety. And I realized what was going on is that I started not being able to hear Jay, because I started saying, what is if these people think this is crazy? Why are we, doing a session on story? And when it ended, the first thing I did was feel the audience stand up and applaud. And I felt comfortable, and I turned around, and people were going crazy. People came up and said that's the best thing you ever did in terms of a learning, development, capturing a sense of what we were about. And each center, we had the same kind of a reaction. And I think the second place was Houston, which experienced the shuttle loss of life. And I was wondering, how are they going to accept that part of the story? And it was the same, where people said, this was beautiful. And the capstone for me was, this was being presented at a large conference that we did in those days at NASA. Sitting next to me was Buzz Aldrin. And again, I'm thinking, how is Buzz going to react to it? It goes back to a different generation. And when I looked at him 2/3 through, he was tearing up. And at the end, he stood up and applauded. He turned to me, he said, this artist knows more about us and what we do and why we do it than we do. And so he captured all these different senses, young people, older, mature people, men, women, and he did it connecting the truth, but in a fictionalized way. It was around a love story of two people coming together, but it was just magical. It was, I think, the best thing that, if you really want to know what a project is, certainly what a NASA project is, I think that story tells it brilliantly. So
I totally agree.
So that was Jay O'Callahan, and you can search it, Forged in the Stars. But it was, but again, it connects this notion of story, of projects, what it means to people, the connection of, and it's with all the technology that's there, but it's about the people and that spirit of trying to do something that really makes a difference. So.
Wow, I'm actually quite taken back by that conversation and the imagery that you just gave me, and think that how are we not doing this more consistently? I'm a bit baffled by the missed opportunity here, but maybe that can be a topic for another day. Yeah. Unfortunately, the time has flown by with you, Jessica. Happened? I don't even know, because she's just so darn lovely.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Well, we're not done with you yet. One of the things that we always like to ask our guests is, what do you feel is that special gift that you have? And with that gift, what do you do to water it, or are you watering it properly?
That's a beautiful question. And I have to say, I can feel some of the Scottish/Britishness that I've inherited over the years, need to fall away in order to talk about what my strengths are. It's not a very British thing to do. So I think my particular strengths are working with images and working with people. So being able to connect with people and get the best out of them and encourage them, and also trusting my sense of image when it comes to storytelling. And I am doing actually not a bad job watering it. I think we're about to start the second one. We didn't give a breathing room between our first feature and our second feature, so we're going into the next one. And somehow convincing this incredible group of people to come on another crazy bandwagon again to do another one. Again, thank God, is maybe one of my strengths, because I got them to do it. So I could do a better job at what I've just told you guys about actually creating room in my day where I don't have any have-tos, but you allow your brain to relax and wander. because really that is where the good stuff comes. And Joseph Campbell always gives you that instruction that maybe the first day that you spend looking out the window, nothing happens. Second day, maybe nothing happens. Third day, but at some point, something will happen in that space. And that's the space of creative incubation that we all deserve and need.
Love that. That is so beautiful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Jessica, I just wanted to let you know that those that comment on our podcast today will be receiving a free book called 3 Things You Should Know About Rockets, which is your book.
Brilliant. That's
so we're really excited to promote you.
Can you tell us one of the things?
Book.
I know we're ended.
Please do.
Can you tell us one thing we should know about rockets, or maybe you come back next time to?
I'd have to say, again, so many things couldn't exist without your influence and friendship, but that especially, the whole book is a metaphor for watching a rocket launch, which we did, which was, I think, the most profound experience of my life, is watching a rocket launch. And so one of the things is that although people think a rocket launch is new, it's not. It's incredibly ancient. So watching these kind of bold pioneers defy gravity in their small vessel for the unknown is something that speaks to about being human, something incredibly primal. So that's one of the things you need to know.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to send your book out to our viewers, because it's going to be fantastic. And we're absolutely...
I've really enjoyed myself.
Well, you made it very easy on us. I'm not going to lie to you. And we're very excited for your film, Stella. We're going to be promoting that alongside you as partners of True Excitement.
And XpoNorth, right?
Come over to our part of the world. I'll take you down the Bladnach distillery and we can have a dram.
Yeah, I appreciate Scotch in its fullest form.
If it ferments, Laurel appreciates it. Anything you want to say about XpoNorth in 10 seconds?
Absolutely. So XpoNorth is the Creative Industries Festival for Scotland. It's all amazing and free and incorporates most of the creative industries there. And we actually had Ed speak. We had Jay speak. There's workshops and panel talks, and this year it is the 15th and 16th of June, online for everybody around the world to access.
Wonderful.
Got to get back to face-to-face. If it's face-to-face, we can do the Mission Driven Leader podcast from there, maybe.
Yeah, that would. Awesome. We should probably do that. We should probably do that. Yeah,
I love it.
That sounds good.
So as we close off, Ed, my head is swirling about what actions that I'm calling out of what I'm going to do, because there were so many good things of our conversation, of the storytelling and projectizing and just seeing things in a different light. But I'm committing to myself to allow my mind to wander. I am a very structured person. I have a lot of stuff on the go on a regular basis, and I have, with great confidence, to know that I don't wander enough, because I always think I need to get to my destination. So thank you for that. And I've always been the girl that goes with the energy, because that's what makes me feel good in the day. But I don't know that I've done it with intention. Right? I don't know that I've shown up with maybe in some forms, but not always. Obviously, that's why I hang out with Ed, because he's great energy. So maybe I do sometimes. It just shows up. Ed, what are your thoughts?
No, I think our podcast is around intentional energy. Sometimes these things they happen, and then we figure these things out. No, I've loved the discussion. I think all these things connect. And I guess I'd leave it with, I always loved a quote from Hannah Arendt, who said that storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And I come back to that because when we started doing stories at NASA is a very decentralized culture. If you tell people something, if you try to even kind of force them in a direction, they will push back. But at the end of the first Masters Forum, where we got people just sharing stories about projects, many of the senior folks came up and said this was great. It wasn't training. This was something that we owned. It was our chance to kind of be our own gurus and learn from each other. And so I think that's what story does, and that's what I get from this. I think we need to do more storytelling, and more Maria Tatar books out there.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of the story. Be afraid of not telling it, is what I hear us saying.
Oh, I like that.
I love that. Can I end with an image?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a story called The Story Tree, and it's an African folktale. It's different all over Africa, but the basic gist of the story is that they're two boys herding goats along this long Sahara, and they're exhausted and hot and tired, and they take refuge underneath this huge tree, and the tree's realms look like they go on forever. It's massive and tall, and they can't see the end. It just goes into the sky. And one of the older boys starts climbing the tree, and the younger boy gets nervous and says, "Look, you're climbing too high." And the older boy shouts down, "You're just scared," and keeps on climbing. So the younger boy climbs after him and says, "Please slow down, you're climbing too high." And the older boy says, "You're just scared," and keeps on climbing. And they're never seen again. And that tree is called the Story Tree.
Wow.
Wow, that's excellent. Wow. With that in mind, I'm going to climb out of this conversation. But I will be back. I will be back. And Jessica, absolutely. Not only will I be back and Ed will be back, but we sure would love to have you in the conversation again, because we just didn't get enough time with you.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I'll come back anytime.
Thanks for listening to the Mission Driven Leader podcast, presented by TaleoConnects.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to the show. Production of the podcast is by @Heart Creative and can be found at @heartcreative.com.